Okay, here's a bit of a puzzle for you. What do these things possibly have in common? These huge monster houses in rural China, underground banks humming away in Tokyo, really high-end Japanese restaurants, and get this, a newly elected Japanese senator.
Huh. Yeah, it really sounds like a setup for something, doesn't it? But it's actually all part of this incredibly fascinating, uh, very human, and sometimes really surprising story.
And that's exactly the story we're diving into today. We want to take you on this complex, winding journey of Chinese migration to Japan. The idea is to get past the usual headlines, the numbers, and really try to grasp the personal experiences.
Yeah, the motivations behind why people move, the challenges, the real tough stuff they faced, and how it all ended up transforming not just their lives, but Japanese society too.
And we're basing this on some pretty solid ground. We've got academic research, detailed news reports, but also these amazing, very personal oral histories.
Right, those are key because they give you a window into actual lives. It's not just data, it's stories, which paints a much richer picture, I think.
Definitely. And speaking of stories, we have a really timely hook for today. Just confirmed, actually, on July 21st, 2025, Shi Ping, who's a commentator originally from China, has been elected to the Japanese House of Councilors.
And his election is more than just a political event, isn't it? It sort of shines a light on this dramatic shift, this evolution in the profile, and maybe the influence of Chinese immigrants in Japan.
Exactly. So that's our plan. We'll trace these different waves of migration, starting way back in ancient times, all the way up to now. We'll hear about the really raw struggles, the sacrifices of those early
And
immigrants.
how they got creative, often working in the informal economy just to get by.
Then we'll jump forward to the more recent wave, the middle-class Chinese immigrants. They're often looking for something different in Japan, maybe a certain quality of life.
Right, and how their arrival is changing things, communities, businesses, even cultural scenes.
And finally, we'll loop back to Xi Ping. We'll look at his journey and how his political rise kind of highlights the diverse range of views, politically speaking, within that Chinese immigrant community today. So, starting right at the beginning. Where do we kick this off? It feels like you have to go way, way back because Chinese people coming to Japan isn't exactly new.
Not at all. That's a really important point. I mean, there are legends, historical claims suggesting really early connections. You hear about the Wajin, early people in Japan, some claiming descent from Taibo of Wu in China.
Wow.
And then there's the story of Xu Fu, the Qin dynasty sorcerer sent to find the elixir of life. Legend says he might have just stayed in Japan back in 219 BC.
Right, those ancient legends. But there's more concrete stuff too, isn't there? Like actual families migrating.
Oh, yeah. By 815 AD, there was this official record, the Shinsen Shujiroku, listing 176 Chinese aristocratic families, they called them Toraijin, living right in the heart of Japan, the Kinai area.
176 families, that's quite specific.
It is. And you even see famous Japanese figures like the shogun Sakanoa no Tamurmaro, whose whole clan traced its roots back to Emperor Ling of Han China. It shows this deep-seated influence, really woven into the fabric of early Japanese society.
So it wasn't just trade, it was people, families, influencing culture, and even the ruling class.
Exactly. And often, conflict pushed people. During the Mongol invasions of China, for example, Chinese refugees fled to Japan. A really notable one was Mugaku Sogen, a Zen Buddhist monk.
Oh, right.
He ended up advising Japan's leader, Huge Tokimune, and actually influenced how Japan resisted the Mongols. So conflict sometimes brought unexpected expertise.
That's fascinating. And there's that strange detail after the Mongol defeat, the Japanese spared the southern Chinese soldiers.
Yeah, it's a bit dark. They killed most of the other captured soldiers, Mongols, Koreans, Georgians around, but they spared the southern Chinese, apparently believing they were forced into it. But, and this is crucial, they were then enslaved, so it shows a very calculated distinction being made.
Hmm. Okay, so beyond conflict and aristocracy, there was also just skills and trade driving migration.
Definitely. During the Ming Dynasty, Japan was more decentralized, and local lords, the daimyo, actively encouraged Chinese immigrants to come for their skills. It boosted local economies.
So you started seeing Chinese communities pop up, especially in places like Kyushu.
Exactly. And it wasn't always straightforward trade. You had figures like Wang Zi, a Chinese pirate, setting up bases in Japan. It was a real mix.
And even advisors in Okinawa.
Right. High-level Chinese royal advisors settled in Kumamura in Okinawa during the Sanzan period invited by the local kings. This was about bringing in specialized knowledge shaping governance.
It paints a picture of a really complex, long-standing ties.
Absolutely. And think about someone like Koxinga, Zheng Chenggong,
Yeah.
a massive hero in Ming loyalist history, right? Born in Japan,
Mm.
Chinese father, Japanese mother, went on to capture Taiwan from the Dutch. His life just embodies that whole transnational reality that existed even back then.
So all that history forms the backdrop. Then we hit the post-World War II era, and especially after China's reforms, things really accelerate, right? A new kind of migration starts.
A massive shift. Suddenly, the PRC allows more freedom of movement, and the numbers just explode.
Hmm.
Think about it. Around 150,000 Chinese in Japan in 1995.
Okay.
By 2000, it's over 335,000. And today,
Mm.
we're looking at well over 600,000 legal immigrants.
And that's just the legal count. There's the undocumented population plus, and this is a key point, once someone naturalizes, gets Japanese citizenship.
They vanish from those stats. Japan doesn't track ethnicity after naturalization, so the actual number of people with Chinese roots is much, much higher.
What was driving this huge surge in the late 20th century?
Well, a huge factor was the massive economic gap. Japan was booming, the economic miracle, right?
Mm.
And they desperately needed workers, especially for those tough jobs.
The 3K jobs.
Exactly. Kitsui, Kikin, Kiinai, difficult, dangerous, and dirty jobs many Japanese workers didn't want.
And China's policies were changing at the same time.
Right on cue. China started easing rules on studying abroad with your own money in '84, then new exit entry laws in '86. Plus, Japan itself launched this 100,000 student plan in '83.
So Japan was kind of pulling people in while China was letting more people out.
Pretty much. They hoped foreign students might fill some of those labor gaps. And within this wave, you saw certain groups becoming prominent, like people from Fujian and Fujian province.
Why them specifically?
They just had this reputation, really entrepreneurial, incredibly willing to work hard, almost at any cost. They saw Japan as this place to make money fast because the difference in wages was just enormous then.
And when you say willing to work hard, a personal stories really hammer that home. Let's talk about S. Mr. Fisher, he arrived in '88. Already had 3 kids back home.
Yeah, and his arrival sounds chaotic. Forced into some random language school by snakeheads, these illegal migration brokers. Shows how little control they had initially. It was a real gamble.
And the work he did, it sounds brutal.
Oh, absolutely brutal. Deep in those 3K industries. He talks about unloading cargo, working in factories that were freezing minus 27 Celsius, construction sites.
Minus 27, wow.
And the hours. He described working 18-hour shifts. He called it working from rooster crow to ghost cry.
That phrase, from rooster crow to ghost cry, it just paints such a vivid picture of exhaustion.
Doesn't it? Utter dedication. He barely rested, worked almost year-round, often juggling 2 jobs. But here's the thing. In just 6 years, he managed to save about 1 million RMB.
Which was a fortune back then.
An absolute fortune. What did he do? He went back to China in '94 and built this enormous house, a monster house, in his rural hometown.
It wasn't just a house, was it? It was a symbol.
Totally. It was like physically planting the money he earned through all that sacrifice back into his home soil. It was proof of success, not just for him, but for his whole family, his community. It speaks volumes about the cultural drive to bring wealth back.
But that level of success, maybe financial success, wasn't everyone's story, especially later on. Q-Miss's experience sounds different. She arrived in '98.
Right. Crucially, after Japan's economic bubble had burst. So the easy money, the gold everywhere perception, that was gone. Conditions were tougher.
And she hit barriers immediately.
Big time. Language barrier was huge. Couldn't find any work for 3 whole months. When she finally did, it was just relentless shifts. Assistant chef, washing cups all night, 10 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Exhausting.
She talks about constant anxiety, like always running through subway stations, trying to catch the last train home. It really shows how people were pushed towards the edges, towards the informal economy.
Which became essential, right? If the official routes were blocked or just too hard, you had to find another way.
It was often the only way, a lifeline. Operating outside the formal system wasn't really a choice for many. It was a necessity for survival. Risky, yes, but what else could they do?
And people got incredibly resourceful in that space. Like H. Mister, this ex-teacher. He spotted a need.
Yeah, he saw that sending money home through the official post office was slow, maybe expensive, and apparently even risky.
Risky how?
Well, his system aimed to be safer. He set up an underground bank. It was a family affair, built entirely on trust, on kin networks.
So how did it work? Cheaper fees?
Yep, Slightly lower fees, like 600 yen instead of 640 for sending 60,000. But the big selling point seems to have been security, avoiding potential robberies at post offices when people collected money and convenience. You didn't even pay up front. The money would land back home first.
That shows real trust. And a gap in the market the official system wasn't filling.
Absolutely. But Mr. Popu was quite enterprising. He also got into pachinko fraud.
Pachinko, the gambling machines.
Yeah, he teamed up with someone else, apparently manipulated machines using fake cards to register wins that weren't real. It shows the ingenuity, but also, the definite risks and the sort of moral gray areas involved.
And this brings up the whole network thing. These communities relied on each other, but that could backfire too.
Hugely. It was a double-edged sword. Support and resources on one hand, but also vulnerability. There's even this term, killing acquaintances.
What does that mean?
Basically, fraud or betrayal within the community, driven by jealousy, competition, people taking advantage of those they knew.
So the trust that held things together could also be exploited. Q Mrs. story kind of shows that dark side.
It really does. Her husband got caught and deported partly because his family was tied up in underground banking. Then she herself got deported later after an accident revealed she was undocumented. The networks that helped them survive also became their downfall because of these internal issues.
It sounds like navigating those early years was just constant tightrope walking. But these networks also built communities, right? Like Ikebukuro in Tokyo.
Oh, Ikebukuro is a perfect case study. It wasn't always a big Chinese area, but post-war it became a hub for black market stuff, partly because immigrants had those cross-border connections.
And then later it changed again.
Yeah, later on, the cheap rent and lots of language schools drew in newer waves of Chinese students and workers. And interestingly, after Japan's big economic bubble burst,
When the main Japanese economy was struggling.
right, that's when many new Chinese businesses actually started thriving in Ikebukuro. They filled niches, catered to the growing community.
To the point where now, in parts of Ikebukuro, you barely need to speak Japanese.
Pretty much, especially northern Ikebukuro, it's become this incredibly self-sufficient enclave. Chinese supermarkets, restaurants, services. You can manage daily life entirely in Chinese.
That's amazing self-reliance, and it links to that idea of living between two worlds, the China-Japan back and forth.
Exactly. Many immigrants, even some who naturalized maybe through things like fake marriages, just to get residency papers, they kept incredibly strong ties to China.
Traveling back often.
Yeah, sometimes monthly. They weren't just sending money home. They might be running parallel import businesses, taking advantage of price differences, or just maintaining family connections. It created this real transnational social field, living life across borders.
And despite all the hardship, the discrimination they must have faced, some people still felt Japan offered something positive.
Yeah, that comes through in some accounts. A sense of fair treatment, perhaps, or just opportunity they didn't feel they had elsewhere. And this led to a kind of cultural adaptation, re-socialization.
Picking up Japanese customs, manners.
Many people noted how polite Japanese people seemed. They'd send things back, Japanese clothes, photos, and maybe less consciously, Japanese pop culture like anime and video games influenced their kids back home.
So these subtle cultural links were forming too.
Yeah, it wasn't just about economics. It was this natural, quiet cultural exchange happening alongside everything else.
Okay, so that paints a picture of that earlier wave, intense struggle, complex networks, carving out a life. But things don't stand still. Fast forward to more recent times. The whole scene looks different, doesn't it?
Completely different. The profile of the newer Chinese immigrants arriving in Japan is really distinct. We're often talking middle-class folks now, Chinese mainlanders, people from Hong Kong.
And often a bit older, maybe families.
Yeah, often in their 40s or 50s, frequently bringing young kids. And their reasons for coming aren't primarily about escaping poverty or just pure economic survival like before.
So what is driving them?
It seems to be more about convenience, feasibility, maybe a perceived better quality of life in Japan, things like safety, education for their kids, maybe a cleaner environment. And interestingly, many aren't necessarily planning to stay forever.
More like an extended stay, a home away from home.
Something like that, yeah. It's
Yeah.
created this much more developed, mature, in Japan Chinese living circle. And technology plays a huge role now.
How so?
Well, many can get by day to day without needing much Japanese at all. They rely heavily on Chinese social media WeChat, Xiaohongshu, for everything. Finding apartments, getting news, connecting with others, and mobile payments like Alipay and WeChat Pay are common in Chinese-run businesses. It's a very self-contained digital and physical ecosystem.
And this has spurred whole new types of businesses and spaces.
Absolutely. You see the rise of really high-end Chinese restaurants in Tokyo. You hear these anecdotes like, oh, Jack Ma was eating here last week. It signals a shift in spending power and tastes.
Not just basic food anymore.
Right. Plus, Hong Kong-style tea cafes are booming, and there are dedicated WeChat groups just for sourcing specific Chinese groceries you can't easily find in Japanese supermarkets.
And beyond food, cultural stuff too.
Definitely. Chinese language bookstores are opening, like One Way Space in Ginza. They're not just shops, they're becoming important cultural hubs, places to meet, attend events.
That's interesting. And even things like stand-up comedy.
Yeah, Chinese language stand-up is growing. Apparently, performers feel they have a bit more freedom of expression in Japan compared to mainland China, even if they still self-censor a little. It shows the community developing its own cultural voice.
And sometimes Japan becomes a stage for bigger events. You mentioned a music tour.
Right, the Li Zi music tour. He's a musician whose work might face restrictions elsewhere. His tour drew fans not just from Japan, but from all over Asia. It highlights Japan's role, maybe unintentionally, as a space for certain kinds of cultural expression for the wider Chinese diaspora.
There are practical advantages too, right? Something about the time difference.
Yeah, it sounds small, but that 1 hour time difference between Japan and China is actually a big plus for many. If they're managing businesses or teams back in China, they get an hour's head start on the day compared to colleagues in China. It makes remote work or management much smoother.
Clever. And this whole new wave has created a service industry just for them.
For sure. Everything from legitimate help navigating Japanese bureaucracy visa applications, setting up companies, to stuff that's more in the gray area.
Like what?
Well, things like helping people use tourist passports to get tax refunds, even if they're actually residents on other visas, or helping people get Japanese phone numbers, which you often need for local online services. It's all about smoothing the process of settling in and navigating the system.
So Japan's place on the map for Chinese migrants is changing?
I think so. Maybe traditionally North America or Europe were seen as the top-tier destinations. But now for a significant number of middle-class Chinese, Japan is becoming a really preferred choice. It reflects changing ideas about quality of life, proximity to home, and just global shifts. Japan's becoming a much bigger player in these migration flows.
Okay, so we have this changing landscape, new people, new motivations, and inevitably that starts to touch on politics, which brings us back to Shi Ping.
Exactly. His story is really interesting in this context. Born in Sichuan in 1962, he talks very openly about severing his spiritual ties with China after the Tiananmen Square events in 1989. That was a real turning point for him.
And he then took Japanese citizenship.
Yes, in 2007, which meant legally he had to renounce his Chinese citizenship. He framed it as a conscious choice based on appreciating Japanese culture and values and deep disappointment with the Chinese political system. A very deliberate break.
And he became known as a commentator writing books, often critical of China.
Very critical. He writes a lot about Chinese politics, Sino-Japanese relations. His books have titles like Why China Will Collapse and The Weight of Japanese Nationality. He's definitely vocal about his concerns regarding the Chinese communist system and what he sees as its expansionist policies.
And his own political stance in Japan is conservative.
Clearly conservative, yeah. He emphasizes Japanese national interests. He's in favor of amending the Constitution, particularly Article 9. The Peace Clause wants stricter naturalization rules and opposes large-scale immigration.
Views that likely generated some opposition during his campaign.
Oh, absolutely. He faced a lot of online attacks, apparently. But he pushed through and won his seat in the House of Councilors just recently, July 20th, 2025.
So what does his election signify in the bigger picture of Chinese immigrants in Japan?
Well, I think it really underscores the growing political engagement, or at least visibility, of some naturalized citizens. And crucially, it shows there isn't one single Chinese immigrant viewpoint.
Right, it's diverse.
Exactly. You have people focusing on business, keeping ties with China, trying to blend in. And then you have figures like Shi Ping actively jumping into Japanese politics, bringing a very specific, sometimes controversial perspective to national debates about things like immigration and foreign policy.
And his election might also tap into existing sentiments within Japan.
It's likely connected. There is an undercurrent, sometimes more overt, of anti-Chinese sentiment or concern about China's influence in parts of Japanese society. We've seen it flare up before, like with controversial remarks by politicians like former Tokyo Governor Shintaro Ishihara.
Using terms like Sengokujin.
Right, using that derogatory term. So Shi Ping's conservative, somewhat nationalistic stance likely resonates with Japanese voters who share those concerns about China, even as he himself is of Chinese origin. It's complex.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back, we've covered a huge amount of ground here, from those really ancient, almost mythical connections.
Right through to the intense economic struggles of that first major wave in the late 20th century, the incredible sacrifices, the reliance on informal networks, both good and bad.
And then shifting gears completely to this newer middle class wave, driven more by lifestyle choices, convenience, creating these self sufficient communities.
Yeah, we've seen how the why behind migration has changed so dramatically from desperate survival to seeking well-being, and how those social connections can be both a vital support and sometimes a real liability.
It really feels like the story of Chinese migration to Japan is still very much being written. It's tied up in big forces like economics and politics, sure.
But underneath it all, it's still about that fundamental human drive, isn't it? The search for a better life, whatever that means for different people at different times. And it's definitely reshaping what it even means to belong somewhere in our very interconnected transnational world.